Professor Brain Brown's research shows that vulnerability fosters good emotional and mental health. It is a sign of courage. We become more resilient and brave when we embrace who we truly are and what we are feeling. The Vulnerable Scientist podcast is a space for scientists to tell their honest and authentic stories. I am your host, Sarah Nyakeri, who happens to be a scientist, informal science communicator, and I help scientists create personal websites. If you want to support this show, go to www.patreon.com/thevulnerable-scientist. You can also follow this podcast on all social media platforms at TV Scientist Pod. Hi everyone, welcome to the Vulnerable Scientist podcast. This is your host Sarah Nyakeri, and today I have Amani Said, right? I said it right?
You said it perfectly. Yes.
Amani Said today, who will be our guest for this podcast. I don't have to greet you because we have been talking before this podcast, right? Okay, so could you introduce yourself to someone who does not know you?
Yes. So today I am a founder of a company called Success Beyond the Lab. I'm a career coach, trainer, and speaker. And if you ask me why I decided to start this company, it's because I was once a lost scientist myself and had no clue what to do with my career after my PhD. So after figuring out the hard way how to create a career that is actually fun and fulfilling, I decided I want to help lots of more scientists to do the same. So that's what I'm on. I'm on this mission to help scientists not just launch a dream career, but to use the knowledge we have to make a difference in society, because I believe we can do that as scientists. So there is more I can tell you, but that would be the main thing I want to share with people.
Okay. What were you doing before doing going into doing that? Could you be specific more about what you're doing before?
Oh my God. Sarah, I mean, how much time do we have?
We have a lot of time.
We have a lot of time, yeah. So maybe I can just explain my journey into science.
Okay.
Because I am a career coach, and career is basically like the topic I like to talk and teach about. So when I was in school, I loved biology. I remember going to biology class, and it was like watching a movie for me. Yes, I was one of those nerds. I would be like, oh my God, this is so exciting. Tell me more. It was literally like watching a movie, going to biology class. And I just noticed I would look forward to going to these lessons. Like all the other lessons were okay. I was a good student in general, but biology would just get me so excited. So I think that's how I decided then to study biomedicine, because I wanted to pursue a career that helps people. As a kid, I want to help people. So I thought first to become a doctor, but then at the age of 15, I did an internship in the hospital, and I did not like seeing lots of sick people suffering. So I'm like, no, I don't think I want to be a doctor. But I still love science. I love biology. So I thought, okay, maybe if I become a scientist, I can create like cures, and like help people who are sick in that way. So that's really what got me on the path of science. I studied biomedical science. Then I decided to move to Germany. So I grew up in Sweden. And I moved to Germany to do a PhD there at the age of 23. Yeah, I started quite early with my PhD. And in the beginning, I was very enthusiastic. I could not wait to start my PhD, because I felt like finally I get to do real science. Because as a master's student, you would get these like short projects like that are quite simple and straightforward, not like risky projects. And then all of a sudden, as a PhD, I had like 3-4 years to really experiment on something. But half a year into my PhD, that's when I got my first you like to talk about lows, right? So I had my first low half a year into the PhD, where all the data that I had been working on just went into the bin. It was really, really like, just like, okay, all these experiments you did, and I was working so hard. I was working nights. I was working weekends. Like, I was working my butt off. And then my PI told me, sorry, like, it doesn't, it contradicts the hypothesis we had. And for me, I was like, so what? So what? I mean, it's still data, right?
Yeah.
It's still data, but it was negative data. It's not confirming the hypothesis. And that was kind of my first wake-up call, what science is like sometimes, that if it's not confirming the story that we want to tell, we trash that data. And I got so frustrated. And I was like, but somebody probably wants to know this information, that this doesn't work. So they don't also waste half a year of their time doing it.
Yeah.
It's like, nobody's going to publish that. So I think that was the beginning of the downfall of my belief and my enthusiasm for science, to be honest. Yeah, because then it became like the PhD became more about creating positive data to sell a story so we can publish versus actually looking for new knowledge.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know.
So
I don't know why
I
I'm
think
so
a lot
taken
of the
aback with that.
Yeah, can you resonate with that?
I'm like, okay. So what did you do about it? Sorry, I have to ask.
I mean, I was young, so I was like, I started this thing and I just have to finish it. I'm not going to give up. I'm also not a quitter. So I'm like, although I felt that it wasn't aligned with my beliefs and I felt like, okay, it doesn't seem that I really fit into this work culture and this is not what I thought science would be like. And already from the get-go, I started getting these messages like, well, of course, you're going to become a group leader and you're going to become a professor. And I mean, I'd never even thought of that. When I started my PhD, it was more about, I love science. But I didn't have this like set vision that I want to become a professor. But then I started getting these messages, right? But of course, this is your path. So I noticed, like, I started getting almost like brainwashed that this is what you should become. This is what you should do to be a successful scientist. And I started struggling with that because I felt, but this is not me. So it felt like, like when people talk about impostor syndrome and that it's so common in academia, I think it's like people trying to force themselves to fit into this box of what it's like to be a successful scientist. And then you feel you're not a successful scientist because you're not living up to these expectations and these standards. Like, oh yeah, I have a life. I actually don't want to work 24/7, or I don't want to become a professor, or publishing was not maybe my main priority. It was more about actually creating knowledge that is interesting. Anyway, I think a lot of things in academia are broken. And today, as a career coach, I find it sad and frustrating that still the same issues are ongoing, and a lot of young people are losing faith and quitting science for some of these reasons. This frustration that I also felt when I was younger. So that was definitely a low in my scientific career. But then that also pushed me to look for something else. I'm like, okay, if you don't fit in academia and if this is not your world, but you still want to create something meaningful using your career, I started asking these hard questions. Well, what is that? What is that meaningful thing that I'm going to create, And that's really when the hard part started, because it's safe when you're a student and you're in academia and you're in that culture, you know what to expect, you know what you can do. But as soon as you leave that bubble, uncertainty hits you.
Yeah.
And you go like, whoa, because there are so many possibilities outside of that world.
Okay. So you mentioned that you grew up in Sweden, right? And how is it the biology, is it like you mentioned that initially you wanted to be a doctor, right? Did you know about being a scientist when you're still in school? When you're still not before, not after.
If I knew about being a scientist when I was in school.
Like if there's a path being a scientist, okay.
No.
You just knew that.
I actually... No, I only found out about science when I was like a bachelor student. Really, it was until that point I had never considered becoming a scientist. And to be honest, the only reason why I did it was because I wanted to travel. Because as a bachelor student, they offered us to do our bachelor project abroad, and they're like, you can do these 3-4 months of your the final thesis in another country. And work in a research institute. And not everybody went for that, but I'm a very curious person. So I'm like, whoa, I get to go to another country? Let's do it. So that was probably the thing that made me want to become a scientist. So I ended up at the EMBL, the European Molecular Biology Laboratory in Heidelberg, which is a very famous institute. But back then I didn't know. I was just like, I just want to go abroad and have fun. So I had the best time of my life, these 3 months. I was like, partying hard, working hard. And then I got to really understand what it's like to do research. It was so much fun. So I'm like, ooh, I want to become a scientist. This is like playing in the lab and you get paid for playing. I mean, this is awesome. Yeah.
If you compare that with the people who have become scientists in your space, like from where you grew up, if they are, do you think it's the exposure that made them, like the same exposure that you had that made them become scientists, or something else?
I'm not sure, actually. That's a good question. I think because I always ask people I talk to, and I talk to a lot of scientists, I usually ask them, why did you become a scientist? And when I give workshops and trainings, I also sometimes ask people, please share in the chat, what are some of these values that made you become a scientist? I think one common factor I hear a lot is curiosity. I think this is what a lot of scientists have in common, when you're curious and you just want to know more stuff, you know?
Yeah. How was your university life like when you were doing your biology degree?
Bachelor, master, you mean? That time? Before the PhD or PhD?
Bachelor.
Yeah. I have to say it was boring because it was all like these lectures. Like you would get like these super thick books of biochemistry, like, I don't know, 500 pages and boring lectures. And then, so I remember not studying too much until it was time to have the exam. Then I would study like, I was one of these I was like a sprint student. I didn't do marathons. I did sprints. So I'm like, okay, exam's coming up. Okay, study. And then I would actually get really good grades despite studying last minute. But if anybody's listening to this podcast and thinking, yeah, I do that too, don't do it. And you know why? Because ask the person 3 weeks later, what did you learn? It's out of your head. Like 80% of the stuff is gone. So repetition is key. So I definitely, if there was one thing I would do differently, if I go back, I would study more consistently, because then the knowledge really gets integrated in your memory.
Okay. So you didn't do anything out of school apart from that EMBL thingy, right? When you still do your bachelor's.
Related to science, you mean?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, no, that was the only thing I did. Yeah.
So how did you transition to your master's? Like, how did you know you want to go to your master's?
I didn't immediately. So yeah, I did a little different transition. So I didn't go straight into master. I actually applied for a job because I wanted to start earning money and feel like an adult. So I applied for a job as a lab technician in a research group at the University of Uppsala. And I was very lucky. I mean, I think the universe has been sending me lots of nice people in my career. And I had the most amazing boss. He was so supportive. And he was encouraging me all the time to study and do a PhD and, you know, succeed in life. So he's like, you know what? Why don't you do a master while you're working for me? You can do both. So I had that option. So I'm like, great. So I was like taking courses in the evenings. And then the research project I did as a technician became my master thesis. So basically, for 2 years, I was working as a technician while doing my master's. And yeah.
Was it but normally masters are not a paid position, right?
Normally not, no.
So that was
there
a good
I was,
thing.
yeah. Oh, that was an amazing thing. And he was so great. I loved him. Robert Robinson, that's his name. And I remember asking him back then when he hired me, I was like, why did you become a scientist? He's like, I just wanted to travel the world. I found it so funny because, I thought he was going to say it's my calling and I believe in science and science is so amazing. He's like, I was young and it was like the ticket to travel the world. And I was like, I don't want a job that I'm stuck in an office all the time. I want to travel and science is the best way to travel. I'm like, okay, makes sense.
Could you explain to someone who doesn't understand the traveling part as a scientist?
Yeah, because there is a downside to that, of course. The upside is that it's easy to get jobs abroad because usually the jobs are based on scholarship or temporary contracts for postdocs. The downside of it is that you don't have any permanent contracts. There's no safety, right? So scientists can easily spend, 2 years here and then they move, and then 2 years here and then they move, 3 years here and then they move. And even when you become a group leader, like Bob Robinson, my previous job, he also had to move. So he spent 5 years in Sweden. And then after 5 years, his contract was over and he had to move again. So he moved to Singapore. And again, until you become a professor, which is basically the only permanent contract most of the time, unless you're a staff scientist.
And how long does that take for you to get to professorship after you've gotten your bachelor's?
Yeah, you probably have lots of gray hair, but I guess, it varies from person to person. Yeah.
Okay.
But we all know that path is very, very difficult to reach. I think if you look at the statistics, it's only like 0.6% who end up becoming professors, right?
Yeah. Oh my God. I didn't know. 0.6? That's very, Okay.
In general, it's very low. Yeah.
It's not even 1%.
But then I also think that we need to address that being a scientist, and I like this, I sometimes see this hashtag on LinkedIn, once a scientist, always a scientist.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe if you leave academia, you failed. Or that you're not a scientist. My God, like I'm using my scientific thinking and methodology in everything I do. Everything, even my cooking, like the way I cook is scientific, like I structure everything and it's so analytical. It's crazy. So I think it's important to see that when we're doing science, it's like a training. So see it as a vehicle. It's a vehicle that is taking you somewhere. It's not the end destination, the PhD or the postdoc or the master, whatever it is that you're doing. And if I look back, it's easy to look back in hindsight when you're a bit older and you go oh my God, all these skills and abilities, they come actually from my research training.
So it's not going to waste.
It's not going to waste. Even if you become a yoga teacher or a dance teacher, I did that actually after my PhD. I was a dancer for 2 years. And people might think, oh my God, you threw away your PhD. How can you go from science to dancing? I was like, why am I throwing it away? I'm using a lot of the skills and abilities. And I probably wouldn't have had the courage and the resilience to start a rescue project like that if I hadn't done a PhD. But after the PhD, I really had this attitude, if I can do this, I can do anything. If I can survive this hell, my God.
There's nothing you can do.
Yeah. So you can also see it as a mental boot camp. Instead of just seeing it, I see that there are lots of posts on Instagram. There is this, what's it called? Grad school sucks and the confused postdoc. And there are all sorts of accounts on Instagram focusing a lot on the negative side of doing research, right? That it sucks and it's so hard. But instead of focusing on the negative and that it sucks and it's so hard, why don't we see it as a training? It's an intense training in resilience and becoming mentally tough, emotionally tough. And then once you survive that, you really feel empowered and that you're able to overcome a lot of obstacles.
this is not the end of this conversation. There are more parts of this episode that are coming up tomorrow and the other days. But if you'd like to, have a taste of what Dr. Amani Said gives, there's a free session. I think is a 1 hour session on 15 September on how to identify your dream career as a PhD student. I'm just paraphrasing what she told me. And you can go to her LinkedIn, as I've linked on the show notes, or you can just look for Dr. Amani Said, or you can go to her website, successbeyondthelab.com, to get more details about her and to get in touch with her.